2025 series on EMI webinars from Manus University. Today, opening the first webinar for us is Dr. Pinar Koçer from KU Leuven, who has recently published an introductory chapter on a volume on assessment in EMI. So you're a perfect speaker for our opening webinar. Please welcome Pinar.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. It's great to be here. It's a big pleasure for me to be presenting here as part of ARCUS webinar series on English medium instruction. And today, as you see here, I will try to provide an overview of assessment in English medium instruction, its emerging practices, main challenges, and areas where content and language instructors can work together. So my purpose here is actually to lay conceptual foundation for the more practice-oriented webinars that will follow. Before moving to my presentation, let me go. Okay. I want to share my contact details with you. As Julia shared, I am Dr. Pinar Koçer from KU Leuven University, being a postdoc researcher here currently, but originally I work as a teaching assistant in Tekirdağ Namık Kemal University. And now I work together with Professor Lee Serku and Samantha Kerr from Bath University on a research project, which covers both assessment literacy and EMI assessment. So please feel free to reach me out to discuss any potential collaborations in the future. And when it comes to my presentation, okay, here we go. Here is my roadmap. As you see here, I will try to organize my talk in 5 parts. Starting with the first introduction part, I will try to set the scene, why assessment matters in EMI settings, and the key questions in educators' mind during assessment processes. Then I will tell you about core concepts in assessment, validity and fairness, but with a specific focus on EMI settings. And in the following part, I want to share main challenges, what kind of difficulties educators might face in assessment practices within EMI settings. And I also will share some research evidence in this part. Then I want to move to emerging practices and some promising ideas to benefit from benefit in designing assessment tasks and during the whole assessment process. Also, I want to share what kind of collaboration content and language teachers can do during their assessment practices. I will then end my presentation with final thoughts for some reflection and discussion. And also, if you have any questions, they're all welcome at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. As you all experienced, today's classrooms are more diverse than ever. So teachers today have to work with students who differ in their linguistic background, social and economic conditions, and their special educational needs. This diversity brings richness to classrooms for sure, but at the same time, they bring challenges and some difficulties for teachers, and which requires teachers to follow differentiated instruction and pedagogies, and it also requires to develop more inclusive and fair assessment designs. Alongside this diversity, EMI also grows and continues to grow globally each day. And before moving to the assessment side in EMI settings, let me just briefly clarify what do we mean by EMI. As you all know, we can say that it is, let me just put this part. It is the use of English language to academic subjects other than English itself in countries where the majority's first language is not English. So is it just about the choice of the language? Of course not. There are many underlying reasons why many institutions and countries have adopted EMI for their teaching and assessment practices. So we can say that the growing use of EMI, here, let me show you, reflects how universities and institutions are positioning themselves in the global context. So some institutions see EMI as a way to increase their international visibility, their academic prestige and reputation. And for some, EMI also helps institutions actually to attract international staff and students. So for students, studying through EMI is also linked to future opportunities. So we can say that it is linked to enhanced employability and global competitiveness. But in short, EMI is often seen as a sign of educational quality. So when we considering quality aspect of education, assessment has become a defining issue for the accountability of institutions. However, many universities adopted EMI for their teaching policy, but assessment practices have not always followed. So this creates a tension, of course, between what is taught, how it is taught, and how students' work is evaluated. So this leads to a growing need to develop more fair, valid, and inclusive assessment practices. So when we talk about assessment in EMI settings, actually we are dealing with two connected areas: content knowledge and language proficiency. So balancing these two is often complex, as you know. While assessment practices, that's why actually educators often keep in their mind some crucial questions: what to assess, how to assess, and who to assess. I even can add one more question here: why to assess? Because the purpose of assessment also have a big role in shaping assessment design. So in terms of what question, what are we actually assessing? Content knowledge or language performance, or both? So should our assessment designs focus on purely disciplinary knowledge, or should we also maintain language demands in our assessment design? With regards to how can we balance the content and language? Should language count? And how can I be fair to students with weak English proficiency while maintaining academic standards as well? And who question here is mostly related to the responsibility. Who is responsible for assessment design and implementation? Well, content teachers, language teachers, or both? These are not easy questions, and the answers often depend on the context, assessment policies of institutions, learning goals of the programs, or teacher beliefs and teacher attitudes. And they are at the heart of EMI. They are the questions at the heart of EMI assessment. But in the end, actually, each stakeholder, including teachers, students, school leaders, even parents, are busy with one simple question: are students being judged on what they know or on how well they can express it in English? So now, actually, in today's webinar, I tried to discuss the question: how can we assess effectively in EMI settings? But it is not my aim to provide you a set of ready-made answers, but just surveying the field and reflecting together on these challenges, on these principles and practicing issues about EMI assessment. So we can now move to the next part, and let me here try to show how these key questions are related to fairness and validity issues in EMI assessment to get a better understanding of issue here. So, like I said before, EMI assessment is concerned with two connected aspects: content mastery and language performance. So the challenge here is not only assessing what students know, but also how effectively they can put what they know in English language. So this creates a tension, of course, between what is taught and how is taught and how students' work is evaluated. And this complexity and challenge raise, of course, conceptual and practical concerns for EMI assessment. And these are closely related to core principles in assessment practices. What are they? They are validity. Okay, let me share the slide first. They are validity, fairness, and transparency. And so what do we mean by fairness in EMI assessment, in EMI setting? It is making sure that students aren't disadvantaged because of language. As you know, every student in EMI settings, not every student have the same level of English. And this shouldn't limit how well they can perform and how well they can demonstrate what they know. So in terms of fairness, when you make sure that each student has a fair chance to show what they know, then we can say that we can talk about a fair assessment in EMI settings. Then comes validity. In terms of validity, of course, the main definition also related with the term itself. Are we truly assessing what we intend to assess? Here, a valid EMI assessment should focus on content mastery while maintaining language demands reasonable and relevant to the content as well. And when it comes to transparency, when students should clearly need to understand what is expected of them and how their work will be judged. So when assessment criteria are open and clear enough for both teachers and students, then each stakeholder can engage in assessment process with greater confidence and trust. We can also pay attention to here assessment practices. In terms of assessment practices, they can take many different forms, of course, based on the assessment policies of institutions or teachers' own experiences and beliefs with assessment types and designs. So to start, a summative assessment, still traditional approaches like written exams or oral presentations remain common because they are relatively easy to apply, or we can say they are familiar and really aligned with academic standards and norms. However, sometimes they can put more weight on students' language skills rather than on their content understanding. That's why today educators incorporate alternative and formative assessment tools in their assessment practices, such as peer and self-assessment, portfolios, reflective journals, or collaborative projects. These kinds of approaches allow students to show what they know in multiple ways, and this also supports their learning rather than focusing on just one final outcome. And here, in designing assessment tasks or these approaches, clear assessment criteria and transparent grading rubrics are also crucial to make sure that everyone knows what is being assessed, why it is being assessed, and how it is being assessed. So now, all these approaches or the main principles like validity, fairness, and transparency, of course, this is much easier said than done. I mean, while designing assessment tasks for a multilingual setting for EMI students and keeping fairness and validity at the same time, teachers and educators have to face a lot of challenges, of course. So here now, I want to talk about main challenges along with research evidence. Let me start with the first one. The first one is language barrier. So even when students have a deep understanding of the content knowledge, still their ability to put it in English can limit how well they can perform in EMI settings. So is it fair to penalize the student with weak English even though they know the content perfectly well? This brings us to the validity and fairness issues. So we need here, actually, let me just check again my slides. Are we truly assessing what our students know about physics, geography, engineering, or psychology, or unintentionally we are assessing their language abilities? In this sense, when these lines a bit blur, then fairness and validity of our assessment tasks becomes questionable. Then another challenge is about teacher preparedness. Most EMI instructors are experts in their disciplines, of course. However, they are not necessarily trained to develop assessment tasks for multilingual settings or EMI settings. And without proper training, maintaining consistency and fairness even becomes harder. When it comes to students often see EMI assessments as language tests. So this perception can increase their anxiety level. It can lower their motivation and confidence as well. Of course, we cannot ignore institutional support here. Without adequate, clear, coherent policies or training provided by institutions, each instructor applies their own assessment policy, their own assessment design and criteria. And of course, this creates and it just raises inconsistency problems. And of course, it also weakens accountability of institutions. Now let me just share what research tells about these challenges. Okay, here we go. There is a growing interest in assessment studies recently. And here are some core concepts. I want to share a kind of a list, but in the following slides, I want to share each theme with research evidence. So we can see that researchers highlight as core themes in their studies, exam language and design is important in assessment studies in EMI settings. So the language used in assessment tasks and the way the tasks are structured play a central role when especially balancing the content and language. So the debate actually has shifted from whether language matters in EMI assessment to how language affects students' academic success in the long term or short term. Another theme is teachers' English proficiency. Researchers paid attention to teachers' English proficiency to explore how it affects in shaping assessment task design and the whole assessment process, actually. Because grading scores, giving feedback are also being shaped by teachers' English proficiency levels as well. And some other researchers investigated assessment formats or tasks in EMI assessment studies to see how effective they are or what impact they have on students' learning. So now I'd like to talk about each team one by one with relevant research studies. And the major focus of EMI studies is on language proficiency and fairness issues. And the main finding based on relevant studies is that linguistic proficiency strongly affects EMI success. So as you see here, Curl et al., Rose et al., and Ixie and Curl, in their studies showed that English proficiency of students predicts academic success in EMI settings across contexts like China and Japan. And similarly, in another study, Lo and Fung also reported that when exam language becomes more linguistically demanding, students' scores drop. Of course, this highlights a risk, and this risk is just mentioned by Ari in his study, as EMI assessment may reflect language ability more than content understanding. That's why scholars call for more scaffolded and differentiated design in assessment, which supports student learning, but at the same time minimizing language bias in assessment designs. Secondly, we can talk about diversity and inclusivity. Here, let me see. Researchers highlight that students' cultural and linguistic diversity influence how they experience assessment. For example, an assessment task format or question type might be quite clear to some students, depending on their cultural background or depending on their experiences with the same type of format. But for others, it might be totally new, like reflective writing or open-ended essay question. These might be totally new or unfamiliar for some students. And all these factors can affect how students engaged in assessment process. And in terms of the balance between content and language, recent studies show and point to blurred boundaries. So different approaches exist here. Some are more content-driven, focusing on disciplinary knowledge, while language is seen just as a tool. Others take a more integrated view and see language as part of the construct. They also pay attention to language, like while they are analyzing an essay of a student, they also see the language as part of the construct in terms of clarity of the argumentation. And we also have some collaborative models where content and language teachers work together during designing rubrics or co-assessment sessions. So the key idea here, actually, through cross-disciplinary collaboration, we can enhance transparency, fairness, validity, and alignment in our assessment task. However, even the best ideas face practical barriers, of course. So at the institutional level, researchers highlight a lack of trained EMI assessors. So here, many EMI instructors are not necessarily trained to design and develop assessment processes for multilingual settings. They have limited resources, they have limited time, and they even have inadequate institutional support. Therefore, without proper training, teachers are left to navigate all complexities and challenges alone. And the next part is about, okay. So in short, I want to wrap up the research findings for you here. Even though there's a growing interest in EMI assessment, we can still say that we need more empirical, more systematic and comparative research studies, which will help us to see the gaps in the field, or the main problems, or the best practice. So it will help us see the big picture better. And the biggest challenge still is language remains a structural trait to validity, and if it is not actually handled deliberately. So similar, the studies I have mentioned and several other studies show that when linguistic load in assessment tasks increase, students' scores often drop. That's why we cannot separate language and content in EMI assessment tasks. Another important research finding is about assessment literacy. So here, scholars call for EMI-specific assessment literacy frameworks. Now, one that explicitly addresses unique demands in multilingual settings and EMI settings. And at the classroom level, in practice, actually, there's still highly inconsistency between instructors. Some instructors weigh language heavily in assessment, while others ignore it. Or formative assessment, assessment for learning approaches, or peer and self-assessment. These might show real potential. However, at the practical level, we can say that they are rarely used or unevenly applied. So, based on these research evidence, we can say that we still need some more research, and still so much to explore in EMI assessment. So first of all, we need longitudinal classroom-based studies to see how assessment evolve over time, and what long-term impact they might have on students' success. And it is also vital to include students' voices and agency, because they are the ones who experience assessment firsthand. So their perspectives can reveal what fairness and accessibility really mean in practice. And cross-institutional collaboration is also key. So when institutions or instructors among different contexts, when they share their experiences and data about assessment practices, we can build a more coherent understanding of what effective EMI assessment looks like globally. And of course, we can't ignore the role of technology and artificial intelligence, because digital tools can help us to give feedback, individualized feedback or adaptive, and they can also help carrying out formative assessment and help students to track their own learning, but still we need to stay alert to ethical issues as well. As you see here, we need more evidence-based, coherent, and language-aware approaches to EMI assessment. So now, let's see in the next part. Here we go. What approaches might be really helpful in designing more valid, fair, and inclusive assessment? And here, when we talk about EMI assessment, or generally assessment, it is not just about what students do or what teachers do in assessment process. It is also about what teachers need. And here I want to shortly show you as a list what teachers need. But in the following slides, I want to talk about each construct in detail. Teachers need institutional policy and support. They need collaboration, EMI-specific assessment literacy skills, and ongoing professional training. So in terms of institutional support, teachers need coherent and clear EMI assessment policies, which connect learning goals, learning outcomes, and assessment criteria so that everyone knows what is being assessed, why it is being assessed, and how. And institutions also play a big role in building ethical and inclusive assessment cultures so that content and language are valued fairly. And also ongoing professional development is crucial, and it's really essential for teachers to update their assessment skills, to reflect critically on assessment designs, and to see how language affects fairness. So institutions has a big responsibility here in providing enough support and ongoing professional development for educators. And secondly, we need to talk about collaboration. It can take many different forms, from co-designed rubrics to joint assessments, grading sessions. So teachers can work together and they can benefit from these models like team teaching, consultation model, or co-assessment models, so that they can help reduce language bias. And for example, language teachers can review tasks so that the task unintentionally disadvantage students for English or because of their language. Or they can even help design rubrics together in order to reduce language bias. This kind of partnership and collaboration helps to improve rubric design. It can enhance feedback quality, and it also helps to get a shared and clear understanding of expectations for each stakeholder here. And what about assessment literacy skills? EMI instructors need stronger assessment skills, but these should be EMI-specific assessment literacy framework. So assessment literacy is not just about grading students' scores. It is about to know how to design, interpret, and use assessment effectively to promote students' learning. So in EMI settings, it becomes even more crucial, because without EMI-specific assessment literacy, teachers might misinterpret students' scores just based on their language skills instead of their content understanding. So developing an EMI assessment literacy framework can improve fairness and inclusivity. It can enhance teaching and feedback practices and assessment practices. It can also help institutions shape their assessment policies more coherently. When it comes to the approaches, emerging practices, I want to start with the guiding principles behind these approaches. It is assessment for learning. And as you see here, we can define it any assessment where the design and practice aim primarily to promote students' learning. So in EMI, assessment for learning ensures that helping teachers to give feedback supporting both content and language learning. It can keep students more engaged in academics, in assessment practices. And it can also help us to make sure that what we teach is truly reflected in what we test. And here are some emerging approaches we can benefit from while designing our assessment tasks in EMI settings. To start, formative assessment approaches. These form of approach assessment supports student learning, and ongoing checks or feedback sessions help students improve and track their own learning rather than just being judged solely on one final exam or outcome. We also see value in co-assessment models where language and content teachers work together to develop rubrics or assessment criteria, so that students' scores are not just judged by only language or content aspect. And scaffolding techniques also important here. These are guiding questions or example answers which help students to move step by step to a more independent performance. And another one is we can benefit from multilingual learning materials, differentiated instruction or digital technologies, so that we can make our assessment tasks more accessible. And multimodality is also important here, which means using graphs, videos, or other formats, just rather than written text, so that each student can find a way, they can have multiple ways to demonstrate what they know. Transparent and clear rubrics are also important, showing the clear weight of language versus content, so that everybody knows how their work will be judged and assessed. We can also use peer and self-assessment reflective practices so that students can engage more and they can be more active in assessment processes. And the last one is I want to share is Dalton Puffer's cognitive discourse function framework. This refers to linking subject-specific cognitive learning goals to with the linguistic representations. Actually, there are 7 constructs. So students use, according to this framework, students use the language to classify, to define, to describe, to evaluate, to explain, and explore, and to report. So these constructs can help or serve as a bridge between language and content. Actually, here I want to also say something about this framework, because in one of our studies with Professor Lee Serkov, we also trying to develop a cognitive discourse function competency framework for teaching, learning, and assessment for both students and teachers. But now I just have to shift to another project. But if any of you is interested in cognitive discourse functions or finds this topic interesting, please feel free to reach me, because a research partner will be great. We're also looking for grant opportunities, so we can work on this topic together. It is mostly related to balance between content and language and for clear settings, but for EMI also we need such frameworks. I really find this framework helpful for EMI assessment designs as well. But more importantly, without adequate institutional support and EMI clear assessment policies, we cannot talk about the sustainability of these practices. So only clear and coherent policies and support make these practices sustainable. So now let me see the time. Sorry if I don't. Okay, I still have time. To conclude, actually, I want to say the overall goal is simple here. I mean, it is it's just simple in theory, of course. It is not so simple in practical level. It is actually quite complex. But the idea, the main debate is here to design assessment that gives every student a fair chance to show what they know in both the subject and content. And a fair EMI assessment should be transparent, valid, and balanced. And by adding scaffolding and a bit of reflective practice, teachers can improve their assessment design and task to support students' learning and to make assessment more inclusive, supportive, and effective for all learners. So, as my last word here, I want to say that EMI assessment is not a kind of separate testing. Instead, it is an evolving practice which requires us to be reflective and critical on what we value and how we define success and how we can support best our students in demonstrating what they know. So now, I'd like to take a moment to open the floor for reflection, or if you have any questions, they will be also welcome. But please, firstly, let me end my slides. Here are the references and sources I benefit while preparing my slides, but I also put some extra if you are interested in further reading. And here is some guiding question for you. If you want to share any experience of yourself about your local context, any challenges you have faced and what kind of coping strategies you use, or any kind of collaboration worked in your case, and what institutional support you have, or just simply in designing EMI assessment tasks. What do you do? How do you feel about these challenges? And what is your position towards language and content? So you can share any ideas, or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask as well. And thank you for your time and attention. I hope you found the webinar helpful and informative enough. And I really thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. So now the stage is yours, Julia. If any questions, they're welcome.
Thank you so much, Pinar, for your informative session. I'll just stop the recording here.